All right, welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar. My name is Kyle Barnhart. I'm with the GVSU Alumni Relations Office. I'm joined today by Melissa Perino from GVSU's Center for Adult and Continuing Studies, along with today's presenters, Jeffrey Daniels and Hazel McClure from the University Libraries. This monthly series is a partnership between the Alumni Relations and Center for Adult and Continuing Studies offices and features a range of topics for your personal and professional life. Today's topic is Not Your Grandma's Librarian, how to Google your way to the best information. And I'm going to turn it over to Melissa to introduce today's speakers.
Thank you, Kyle. This title is fun, and I think today's information will be fun as well. So thank you. I am thrilled that I have the pleasure of introducing today's speakers to you. We have today with us Jeffrey Daniels, not to be confused with the other Jeff Daniels that is also from Michigan or in Michigan, but Jeffrey Daniels is the Associate Dean of Curation, Publishing, and Preservation Services. He's been with Grand Valley for 22 years and held a variety of positions in the library. Jeff earned his bachelor's degree from Grand Valley and a master's in library and information science from Wayne State University. Jeff is passionate about connecting users with information they're looking for, removing barriers to make the research process as seamless as possible. A couple of interesting facts about Jeff. First, he played defense for the USA hockey team that won gold at the 1980 Winter Olympics. And second, he really enjoys making up blatant lies for his professional biography. Jeff, welcome. We are glad that you are here today. I also have the pleasure of introducing you to Hazel McClure. Hazel is the head of liberal arts library programs and an associate librarian at the university. She co-edited Engaging Students Through Campus Libraries, High Impact Learning Models, and Teaching Information Literacy Threshold Concepts, and creating lesson plans for librarians, both within several years. She loves libraries because they help people and communities connect with ideas through curiosity. A fairly new manager, she's also interested in supporting colleagues' work-life balance and using mindfulness and meditation to support well-being, learning, and work. Sounds like Hazel might need to come back and do another webinar for us later. Hazel loves to cook and eat, run, hike, read, and spend fleeting moments with her teen kids. Thank you both for being here. Before we get started and I turn it over to you, we do want to do a little bit of housekeeping or Zoom keeping, we like to call it, for today. We are recording today's session, and we will include a link to that recording at the end. Actually, you'll probably get that next week. We'll follow up with you via email with a link to the recording, as well as some additional links as well and resources as well. We'll have plenty of opportunity for Q&A here. So if you didn't submit something at the front end, those of you who did, answers are already ready to roll. You'll have plenty of time to generate questions. We do ask that you use the Q&A box that you'll find at the bottom of your screen and drop any questions in there. We'll be monitoring that the whole time. If there's nothing else, which I think we are all set, I am going to have the pleasure of turning it over to Hazel and Jeff. Thank you for being here, and we're looking forward to a great time.
Thank you so much for having us. We're really happy to be here today. We have fun preparing and thinking about what your grandma told you about libraries, maybe. Actually, we also wanted to say your grandma's librarian was probably awesome. And so we just want to get that out of the way. But what we do want to talk about today is some of the myths that people might have in their heads about libraries or information. And we want to help kind of share our insights into how information works, and also respond to some of the questions that we got about libraries and about searching and finding information and research. So the first myth we're gonna debunk here is that librarians know everything. And I feel even weird saying that out loud because it's so not true. And also, but it is something we hear a lot. Like I'll hear professors say it to their students, and I'm always like, oh no, don't say that because I don't know everything. What librarians do, though, is they know how to find a lot of stuff. and they are dogged in their determination to find information. And also we are interested in how information is organized. And so that's what helps us find information, is that we're not just thinking about like, you know, what we need to know and how do I get directly to it. We kind of get excited about how people organize that information to begin with, which helps us figure out where stuff is. And so I have 2 examples for you where we're going to talk a little bit about how information is organized and how you can use that to your advantage to find information. So I'm going to start out with Google. So Google is a vast, you know, collection of information, right? And so when we search Google, all that Google is doing is finding matches to the words that we put in the box, right? And so what we need to think about when we're searching, whether it's about political information or information for our careers or genealogical information or information about the best recipe to cook for your Thanksgiving dinner, when we're doing those searches, what we need to think about are the words we use, and also knowing some tricks will help you navigate it well. I'm also going to stop a second here and just invite Jeff to jump in at any point if he has things to add when I'm talking. I'm happy to hear what he has to think too. I'm going to share my screen and I'm going to do a search in Google, and I'll talk a little bit about why I'm doing what I'm doing. So as you all know, because of my intro, I love food. And so I'm always looking for great recipes, and I'm thinking about Thanksgiving right now. One of my favorite recipes is a little like fig with some kind of cheese in it. And sometimes it's with bacon, right? Like maybe you guys have had some, actually Grand Valley has this at some of its events. It's really delicious. And so if I'm looking for a recipe, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to come to Google. I'm going to think about what I'm looking for, right? Fig appetizer recipe. And also, I'm just going to point out here, down below, here are some actually things that I've searched for in the past, right? One thing about Google that I think is really interesting, and we're not going to spend a ton of time on this, but Google is actually tracking everything we do, right? Every search that we do is tracked in Google or Amazon or in Facebook, or like all of this information is being gathered about us all the time. And sometimes it helps us because it helps us get to information quicker, but it also sometimes limits what we're seeing. So that's just a side note. I think it's fascinating. But right now my mind is more on these figs. So I'm gonna do search for this fig appetizer. And so I'm seeing fig appetizers with goat cheese, fig crostini, that looks pretty good, fig with almonds, but maybe I don't want goat cheese, right? So maybe I have somebody who in my family who's lactose intolerant. I really don't want cheese. So I'm going to show you a trick that's really helpful, and I use it all the time. If you don't want something in your search, you can use a little minus, right? So minus cheese. So I only want to find fig appetizers that do not have cheese in them, right? So now we've got fig bites with tahini and dried figs and pepper. So like that's one of those little tricks. That minus sign will get rid of all that extra noise when you're looking for recipes. And of course, this is just for Jeff's benefit because I know how much he loves bacon. We're taking out all the bacon fig recipes, right? So that's one trick. Another is using quote marks, right? So using quote marks around a phrase will keep a phrase together. So if I'm finding a lot of fig appetizer recipes for other kinds of cheese, but I really want just like those goat cheese recipes, which is what I actually do want, fig appetizer recipes with goat cheese, right? So goat cheese is in quotes there. Everything that I find should have goat cheese in it now, right? So that's another little trick. I also, I'm gonna make sure I have following my notes here. So that's one kind of way that you can navigate Google, thinking about those words. The other thing about librarians is that we try stuff. If it doesn't work, you try again. You try different words. You try, one thing is trying to figure out what the actual word is. Sometimes you might think, oh, the other day I was doing a search for the Western Reserve. I know that I have an ancestor, since we're going to be talking about genealogy, whose name is Mesa Clark, and his papers are archived in the Hiram College Library, but I've only seen a few of his letters, and they're in a book, and I could not remember the name of this book. It ends up, I did finally find it, and it's like Literature of the Western Reserve, but I couldn't remember that phrase, Western Reserve. It was just escaping, so I was looking for Western Expansion, and it didn't work, and I was like, couldn't find this guy, and I thought, did I imagine that book? When I finally found that word, it's a key, right? Those keywords are the key to these searches. So that's navigating one system. And I want to pop into another system really quickly. This is a totally different system, right? This is not Google. This is Ancestry Library, which is a database that gathers tons of genealogical research. And I'm using genealogy as an example because some folks wanted to hear about genealogy. I'm not an expert in genealogy. I kind of dabble in it. I think it's really interesting, but I want to get you started. So, but this is an example of a collection. Unlike Google, which just gathers everything into a big pot, this has collections, right? It has census, it has obituaries and death certificates and marriage certificates and immigration records. So you have all of these collections of kind of buried documents that are not available usually through Google, sometimes, but usually not. It uses a very different search strategy, right? So I'm gonna do a quick example search of, oh, and I have to log in again. So I'm using this through my public library, by the way. So this is, I have access to this through Grand Rapids Public Library. And libraries have different packages, but many public libraries have genealogical databases available. So I'm going to do a search for my great-grandma. So speaking of grandmas, my great-grandma, I knew her. She died when she was 93, when I was about 9. And she, what I remember of her is that she was tiny, and she had a big blue perm. And she always had a shirt, kind of like what Jeff and I are wearing, actually, a flowered shirt with polyester pants with an elastic waistband. That's what I remember about her. I don't remember much, but so that's what I remember. And she lived on this farm that was really close to where we grew up, that we would go visit this house. And so when I searched for her the other day, when I was kind of boning up for this, I did a search. Her name was Audra Williams, but her maiden name was Rao. And so if you do a search for this person, you can come in here and you see all of this information. So Social Security applications, census from different years, every 10 years there's a census, church records. And so the other thing that we're seeing along the right-hand side here is her name and the birthplace, and then maybe some other information. So what's kind of interesting and what's difficult about genealogy research is there are a bunch of Audra Raos. I mean, I didn't know this, of course, but I found it out when I started doing this research. There were other ones. So my grandma never stepped, or my great-grandma never stepped foot in Philadelphia. She was born in Ohio, and she came straight to Michigan. So some of these records are not even her, right? So that's what's kind of fun and tricky about the search, is that there are false leads everywhere. And so a lot of it is confirming what you find. So I'm just going to take a really quick look at, here's this 1920 census, and I think this is pretty cool. So it gives you, somebody has transcribed this, so it's all typed, but you can actually look at the original document and see where she's listed. So at the time, she was actually named Audra Williams at the time. She was married to my great-grandpa Clark. They were in Battle Creek, which I never knew they lived in Battle Creek. I think that's pretty amazing. And they worked in a toy factory, both of them. So he was working a pressman is what's listed under his occupation. She was a packer. So this must have been before they came to Marilla, Michigan and bought their farm. And so they were living with her parents. So you can find out a lot of information here really on one document. And then when you do this genealogical research, what you end up doing is doing a lot of searches and doing a lot of confirmation. And then also, I'm going to point out, you can edit these searches. So if you're having trouble finding somebody because their names are mistranscribed a lot. So she actually in another document is referred to as Anna, which was never her name. She's often called Audrey. So sometimes you need to put in more details. So you can say Audra Rao, and then you could say her mother was Cora Rao, right? And so having that extra detail in there might help find more information, right? So I'm just giving you a little taste, and I don't want to bore you. I know demonstrations can be kind of boring, but I want to give you a sense. This kind of searching is very different from the Google searching, right? And so when you're thinking like a librarian, what you're doing is you're thinking, how is this system organized? What's the information in there, and how do I navigate it then? And so, librarians don't know everything, but we can find, where your grandma worked in 1920. So there you go.
Thank you, Hazel.
Yeah.
The second myth that Hazel and I wanted to talk about today was that there is only one right way to find information, particularly around scholarly information. It's something that I hear a lot, and I refer to it as research insecurity. And we actually hear it quite a bit from students that might be returning to college. That is not true. There is multiple ways to find information. In fact, before we started on this presentation, I was talking to Kyle and Melissa on the call, and Wikipedia came up. I use Wikipedia. Wikipedia is a lovely source of information. It's been quite a few years since this was done, but there was a study done years back. Wikipedia is as accurate as some encyclopedias that you grew up using. The information is edited daily by a multitude of people. It's a good source of information. What we like to encourage people is don't stop at Wikipedia. Hazel mentioned some keywords and search terms. Find out a little bit about your topic on Wikipedia, find out how people talk about that topic, and then move on with your research. There's nothing to be ashamed of in finding information the way all of us find information. I use Wikipedia almost all the time. Another thing that is very important to keep in mind is that your search results are going to vary. We've all used, well, I would imagine a lot of us have used the Amazon website. A lot of us have done research on Google. Recently, I was really into researching hot tubs. And then for the next week or two, any website that I went to on the internet had a lovely ad for a hot tub on the right side of the page, and they had a deal for me. It's important to know that websites are tracking your information. Hazel and I talked about this a little bit, and she scolded me from going too far into this because it can be very boring. But Google, anything with a .com ending really on a website is trying to sell you something. It's okay to know that, go into operating that way, knowing that. If you are on a website and you can't tell what that website is trying to sell you, you are the product. And what I mean by that is they are gathering your information. They are gathering what you're searching. They're gathering where I live, what I do, and that I'm interested in hot tubs. And then they sell that information. The internet's about selling things. So your results will change based on how you've been using the internet recently. Hazel went into a little bit about the different ways to find information. Keywords is a really important one. So that just lends to there is no one way to find the information that you're looking for. And I have another crazy tip. I share this one all the time. No one ever believes me, but if you have a good search and you've used some good search terms, if you look past the first 3 hits, you can still find relevant information. There was a study done when we were rolling out some software years ago by one of our librarians, and the percentage of people who never click past the top 3 results, it was in the 90s. There could be some good information on the second page. And this one is near and dear to my heart. Melissa mentioned that my name is Jeff Daniels. There's a Jeff Daniels, the actor. If you Google me, I don't show up till page 10 because Jeff Daniels, the actor, is quite a bit more famous than I am. And that's ridiculous. Hazel?
I think you should use the minus sign with actor. Jeff Daniels.
Actor?
Actor.
Then
yeah.
you would miss hits about the wonderful plays I did in college.
That's true. That's true. We don't want to do that. So the next myth is that librarians are gatekeepers. That's a term that is used to be used a lot, that librarians were kind of like allowing you into the information, and the way the information has changed has completely obliterated that idea, because people have access to information all the time. We're not thinking about keeping people from information. We're really more focused on getting people to the right information and helping them, like letting them be empowered to find the right information and building skills. So that's what I do is work with librarians who work with students who are looking for good information. And it really depends on the discipline and the project, but good information can look different in different situations. And so that's what we're trying to teach students to be able to look at, like thinking about evaluation of information. Who created this? That's a big question. Who created this information? Who published it? What are their credentials? What's their expertise? And it depends, on what you're looking for, what that looks like. So if I'm a psych student doing research for a paper, and I need to do research on the most current strategies for dealing with depression, it's not going to be a Google search. It's going to be going to databases in the library and looking for peer-reviewed articles that have been through a process that ensures that information is really reliable. If I'm looking for a recipe, my thinking about who is an expert is kind of different, right? Like there might be chefs that I really like and I might go to them first, or there might be websites that I think have really great recipes, or I might go to those comments, right? But whatever the information you're looking for is, what you want to do is think about who created it, what's their expertise, why do I care what they think, right? And then along with that is, what do they want out of this, right? So are they trying to sell us something like Jeff was talking about? Is this, and there are a lot of these websites that are ultimately just sales pitches, right? Or is this person trying to further their own career or further their own agenda? So this is really big right now with political topics, thinking about the information that we encounter and thinking about where it's coming from and what the spin is, and figuring out how to find the most reliable and bias-free as possible information. Although of course there's never no bias. And so, but being aware of that is really important as you ingest this information. One of the things to think about is the domain names. So using, Jeff mentioned .coms. .coms are commercial websites, right? Like that's what that stands for, commercial. And but using .gov, which is a government website, might be more reliable. Educational institutions have .edu, nonprofits have .org, right? So that doesn't mean that those are all totally reliable, but they have different focuses, right? They have different purposes for being there. So using all these clues to think about, why is this information here? That helps us as citizens, as people, as students, as teachers, evaluate that information. And so really, rather than a gatekeeper, I don't know what a good analogy is a
Drinking from the fire hose. I like to think of the internet as a fire hose of information. It's all on, all the time, high speed. Librarians will help you drink from that fire hose and turn it back into a garden hose on a nice warm summer day that is refreshing and crisp.
That's perfect. Thank you, Jeff. Okay, I have the next myth, and this myth has two parts. So I'm going to take the first part and then Jeff's going to take the second part. The first part of the myth, and I hear this a lot and it makes me crazy every time, is that all information is available for online for free, right? So just Google it. Like, why do we even need libraries? Because we have Google. So why have libraries? It obviously makes me crazy because I'm a librarian, but it also is really just very, very incorrect, right? That there is a lot available for free online, and that's wonderful. And it's really great. It means that we have to be able to evaluate information, but it also means that we have access to a lot. There is still a lot that is not available for free. So the ancestry.com that we were just looking at, for instance, that's not free. There is a free version actually, where you can get limited information. But so if you're starting out with genealogy research, that free, account is nice, but really to have access to all of the information, you need to pay for a subscription or get to it through a public library, some institution or historical society that will give you access, right? It's not free. A lot of books, so depending on, you know, I used to work with literature students, a lot of books are not digitized, right? So there are scholarly books that come out with all of these fantastic scholarly essays about, you know, literary topics where you have to come get the physical book, right? So there are things that are that we just don't have access to on Google. For one good example is this Amasa Clark, who I was going to search earlier, who is an ancestor who came to the Western Reserve. He, like I said, Hiram College has his papers, and there are some fascinating letters between him and his wife where she is really upset that he is dragging her west, by the way. But there are these fantastic letters, some of which are published in a book, but most are in that archive at Hiram, not digitized, right? So if I were doing in-depth research about that, or I really wanted to see those letters, I would have to go there and get access to them, right? So so that's just the way it is, right? There is some information out there that we just don't have access to. And then the flip side of this myth, I'm going to hand over to Jeff.
Yeah, it's an A-B situation here. We hear that all the time. Why do we need libraries? Everything's on Google. Not true. We also hear frequently the flip side. Any good scholarly information that I would use for researching a paper is behind a paywall. I can't access anything like that. That is also not true. We also hear that Grand Valley resources are only for Grand Valley faculty, students, and staff. That is partially not true. I will not get into license negotiations, but Grand Valley spends about $5 million a year on resources. And some of that, due to the license that we signed, is behind a paywall, limited to people that are currently enrolled or working with Grand Valley. That is the case. But there are ways around that. We as librarians know that, and we try to curate a lot of information that is good scholarly information and available for free. Another thing that we do, and I know a lot of people don't like to hear this, and it's particularly not relevant right now in a pandemic when we're all supposed to stay at home, but these licenses that prevent libraries from letting non-Grand Valley students access the information often has what's called an on-site clause. So essentially that means if you could have no affiliation to Grand Valley at all, and if our library is open to the public and we're not all shut down, if you come on site, if you are physically at our location, you can have access to everything that we've paid for. It's called an on-site exception, and it's a wonderful way to get that locked down information. So I mentioned that not all information is behind a paywall. Open access is maybe a phrase you've heard, maybe a phrase you've not heard, but essentially it is research done by faculty members and professors and scientists and doctors all over the world. And that author chooses to publish their material in such a way that it is free to everyone in the world. Obviously, publishers don't exactly love, yes, GVSU employees can use the resources. Anybody affiliated with GVSU currently can. I'm sorry, I sidetracked into that question. Open access. It's a publishing model in which the authors are trying to make their information available to everyone. Another really good resource, and if you want to write anything down from today, write down the Michigan Electronic Library, the Michigan E-Library or MEL. You can find it on Google. Any resident of Michigan has access to this. The state of Michigan pays for scholarly resources. In fact, if you go to the database list at Grand Valley State University, a lot of those resources on there are paid for by the state. This is information that you can use as a member of the state, particularly now that we're all really focused online and we can't get in person very easily. The Michigan E-Library is a wonderful place to do some really scholarly research. Your local public library is a wonderful resource. Hazel used it in this presentation alone. All of you live in an area that has a local public library. Every local public library has access to some information that are behind paywalls. Just being a member of the public library will get you into that. You may or may not have heard of the Hathi Trust, which is in a nutshell, it is a program by which some universities have gotten together and they're trying to digitize all the books, particularly those that are no longer under copyright, but they're trying to digitize everything. and then make it available online for free. I mentioned open access publishing. There is a directory called the Directory of Open Access Journals, DOAJ.com. It collects all of these journals that are free for everyone. So even if you have no affiliation to a university, you don't want to go to the public library, there are good places for scholarly information freely available to all of us. And then the fifth myth, because we wanted to finish in about a half an hour, which will be a little over, to allow for questions. But the fifth myth is don't ask that librarian, they're very busy. They have a whole bunch of work to do. And if you ask them a question, first we will shush you, and then we will make you feel stupid for asking the question. And that is not the case. Every library professional that I have ever worked for, if you ask them why they got into libraries, you'll get a wide range of reasons, but those reasons almost always boil down to, I want to help you find this. We want to help connect you with information. That's in my bio, besides playing defense for the Olympic team. I am really passionate about taking what you're looking for and putting it in front of you. And so to that end, we love to get questions. If you can't find something, you're really looking for something, you need that one last article to make this paper great or this project at work, ask us. Ask your public librarians. Ask us on chat. Ask us online. Hazel and I are going to share our emails. Ask us personally. So if I haven't hit this one yet, please just ask.
Thank you, Jeff. That is powerful. Please just ask. You're absolutely right on that. And thank you, Hazel, and thank you, Jeff, for being amazing mythbusters. I may also start referring to you as Ghostbusters, but that's a really bad joke and not my favorite film, but you are mythbusters and you busted a few for us today. I am hungry for figs and bacon. I now know, though, how to actually find better recipes and how to find better information for work. I also was blown away by that gatekeeper and fire hose concept, right? That's exactly it. The two of you are great representatives of the GVSU libraries, and I might even go to say the profession, but of really being engaging and wanting to help people get information that they need and have access to that. And thank you for that. And then I was also blown away by that you are the product piece. I know it, right? But I had just forgotten to really think through that. You're right. I am the product. It is, they're not selling me. Google is not selling me a product. I am the product and they're selling my information to someone else. So thank you both for that piece. We also had a couple of questions that kind of came in to just the panelists. We tried to repost those to everyone that was there. We have a couple of questions in chat as well that we will go ahead and ask. How do you know, our first one in says, how do you ensure you're not getting information so filtered that you end up in an echo chamber within Google? So for instance, your past Google searches lead to similar news stories that Google keeps suggesting, right? How do we make sure that we're not in that echo chamber? I love that concept as well. Your thoughts?
I think that's a fantastic perceptive question, right? Because we all experience that, and knowing that it's a risk is probably the first and most important step. And then I think making sure you have different sources of information, right? So that it's not all through Google or not all through, some people use Facebook as their main news source, right? That things their friends post, right? So knowing that you can't just rely on one source. And so I recently heard a good suggestion about news, I thought, about having a variety of news sources and having a plan, because we also don't want to be totally inundated with all news all the time, but having different sources and ingesting information from different sources, right? So that you get slightly different spins and perspectives. I think that those are important strategies.
I think another thing to be aware of is just the concept of confirmation bias. As humans, we want information that verifies and agrees with what we believe. That's not inherently wrong. That's human nature. But being aware of it is going to help you get more accurate searches. I am not going to get on a political soapbox. I won't do that. But during this last election cycle, go to CNN and then go to Fox News. You know, see what different sides of arguments are saying. You can get a lot of good information by reading something from someone you don't agree with.
Fantastic point, and something we can do often, right? So a couple of questions sort of surrounding the access to libraries, and you covered that a little bit, access to GVSU libraries, right? You covered that a little bit, Jeff, in when you spoke about our licensing and such. But one specific question: can retired GVSU employees use library resources?
Yes. If you have an active GVSU email, and a lot of retirees retain their active email, what you need is an email that ends in gvsu.edu. If you have that, you are covered under our licenses and you can have access to the information.
Great, thank you. And then a related question to that. This is more for, we get a lot of alums that participate in these webinars, and I think I'm interpreting this question correctly, is that if you got your bachelor's degree from GVSU, so you are an alumni, then can you access the GVSU library databases online? And this is, I know, gets tricky, right?
I get this question a lot, Melissa. My background in library was in electronic resources. The license that I referred to earlier, I used to have to read 30-page licenses to figure out who's allowed to access what. I very much want the answer to be yes. The answer is very much no. And the reason that is I mentioned the $5 million that Grand Valley pays for licenses every year. Those are from information providers, publishers, companies that sell information. They see alumni of every school as a potential customer. So they don't want you to use our resource. They want the company that you work for to buy a subscription. The subscriptions for companies are much more expensive than the subscriptions for libraries. So that's why we like to talk about the things like the Michigan e-Library. Those are paid resources, but they're paid for by the state. We like to talk about open access journals. There are thousands of journals. Some of the best faculty members that I've ever worked with really strive to make sure their information is available online to everyone. And then I know it's not a great answer. And I know if it's 3 o'clock in the morning and you have a project for work due tomorrow, the on-site doesn't help. But if you've thought ahead and you know you've got to do some research, going to any library, we could go to Michigan State's library and have access to more information than Grand Valley can afford. It's that on-site clause.
So what you're saying is, if I am connecting today from Indiana and I go to my library there, and I'm a GVSU alum, so you know that, but I go to there's the on-site clause at maybe IU?
Mm-hmm. Yes, and what you'll find is very similar to what Hazel and I have been talking about. Every librarian you run into, even those in Indiana, they want to find information for you. They want to connect you with the resources that you need. We do know the ins and outs of these licenses. We do know why publishers do the things they do, and we will help you navigate to the information that you need.
Great, that is
And
great.
Can I add really quickly that I think, just to not to harp on open access, but I think that that's one of the things that are kind of on our horizon. And I think what a lot of librarians are advocates for open access, because it makes it available to so many people, not just our alum, that would be wonderful, but also globally, and people from anybody with an internet connection could access these things, which makes it just really could help the world. Like if you think about medical information or social work information, like there are all these areas that could really enhance a lot of lives. So it's kind of it's a dream that a lot of librarians have, that more things will go open access. And so, but making that sustainable and making that still high quality, those are the challenges that we're working on. And hopefully more things go open access.
One of the tricks that we try to do when we're talking with a group like this is we try not to get bogged down in any one specific research. Jeff says, as he's about to get bogged down in one specific area. Hazel mentioned medical research. That's something that we get questions about a lot. Guilty as charged, checking WebMD because I have a headache and now I'm convinced I've got lupus. It happens to everyone. PubMed.com. PubMed. It is a large database of primarily free medical information. You can find very good medical information in PubMed.com. There's nothing wrong with going to WebMD and putting in your symptoms and finding out some keywords. Take those keywords to PubMed. You're going to get more accurate and more reliable information.
Fantastic. Fantastic. We'll have to include that link in the follow-up email as well. And I'm very glad that it's just a headache and it's not lupus for you. That's good to know. There was another, speaking of specific actual resources, there was another question in the inbox, which was about suggestions for patent searches. And I know we tried to drop that in the chat. It's a long link to try to reread to folks, but we will include that in the follow-up link as well. And if you didn't see that in the chat, the person who asked that, if I think that was David, not to call you out, but if you didn't see that answer, you can reach out afterwards. We'll give you contact information. Jeff and Hazel promised if today went well, they would give you their contact information. If today really bombed, they would give you someone else's contact information at the university, which is not very nice. So I'm really hoping that today went well. We have another question too. This particular person, like me, loved learning about the minus sign for the Google searches. That was fantastic because yes, I don't want goat cheese with my figs. But do you have any other suggestions along those lines for us? Like the quote?
Oh, Hazel probably has a dozen right off the top of her head.
I have a couple. There's one that I love that's using an asterisk, so the little symbol above the 8 on your keyboard. Using that in combination with the root of a word, like the starting part of a word, will find any variation of that word. So in some searches, that's super helpful. So when I used to be a social work librarian, and so working with students who would be doing research about adolescents and teens, you know, like teen homelessness, right? You could do a search for adolescent with a little asterisk, and then, you know, homelessness, and then find a ton of research that otherwise you would have to do those search multiple times with those different words. So the asterisk is one. Another is using parentheses. Oh, this is hard to explain, but I'm going to try. It's a little algebraic in a way. So using parentheses to when you have synonyms. So, or you don't care, you want one of these things, but you don't need all of these things in your search. So if I were thinking, I want figs and goat cheese or cream cheese, or I don't know what other kind of cheese you would put with these, blue cheese, you could search for all of those at once, right? So parenthesis, first thing or second thing or third thing, and then you're searching for any of those in combination with that first word. Because again, I'm going to go back to that kind of basic. When you're doing these searches, you're just looking for matches for those words that you put in, right? That's your whole search. I will also say, if you Google search tips, there are a lot of Google search tips out there. So there are more than I can cover, you know, trying to make parentheses in the air. So I would, if you're interested in that, I would definitely look into that. There are some wonderful tips that will really change your searches anywhere. And these tips usually work anywhere, like Amazon actually. So if you're searching for a particular kind of shoe, you know, like finding the right, you know, word for the shoe will actually help you find the shoe you want, right? Finding those right words and getting specific when you can be will help those searches a ton.
The tip that I will share is much more commonly known because Hazel's a better searcher than I am, but quotation marks are your friend. If you put quotation marks in pretty much any search box, what you're telling that search engine is, I want you to search for these words together. If you want to research my hockey career and you put Jeff Daniels, US hockey team, it's going to search Jeff, it's going to search Daniels, it's going to search USA, it's going to search hockey. You see what I'm saying? If you put that all in quotes, it's going to search that phrase, unless I'm wrong, in which case Hazel will tell us.
No, I was just going to say in that order. So it has to be spelled right. It has to have the right punctuation. So you put quotes around something and you're like kind of solidifying that phrase. There's no variation there then. So you have to be careful. Like, yes, quotes are your friend, but yes, if you're not finding anything, it might be because you're using too many quotes.
Okay,
right?
let me amend that then. Quotes are your friends if your original search result has 25,000 hits. Put some quotes in there. You'll narrow it down.
Right, there you go. There you go. And so just to make sure I understand that part too, it's like if I was searching along the recipe line for crock pot, if I put the two words together, it's only going to pull up recipes that have it with the words put together versus them separated. And so I would have to do two separate searches. It's great.
And that's really helpful if you can remember a specific, like a title, or if you know, like the other day I was looking for a recipe and I couldn't remember anything about the recipe. It was from a cookbook I had 20 years ago, and it was smothered potatoes. That was the that was the name of the recipe, and it's like this kind of curried faux Indian potato dish. And so I found it though. I found it referred to in this cookbook that I used to have, and couldn't find the recipe. There was no way to get to the whole recipe, but I found out what it was called and I found out what page number it was on, so I could call my friend and have her send me a picture of the recipe. So, but those words, smothered potato, that was the only way I could get to figuring out what cookbook it was in and all that stuff.
Little known fact, Hazel, smothered potatoes dish, much, much better with bacon.
Everything is better with bacon, but that might be a little, and all of the recipe talk, this is not to say, I mean, you two spend a majority of your days, well beyond work hours, I am certain, finding resources for students and ensuring that we have access to opportunities, and that is much appreciated. I think that we have, in the document that we'll be sending everyone, a link to one of the unique things I think you've done is create a list of resources for alumni, right? And on your website, you have a link there for some specific resources as well. And so while we might joke and have fun and talk about the figs and bacon and which is actually better, that or goat cheese, thank you so much for the work that you do. I think, did I just really say that? Could we have not recorded that, please? I also want to make sure that we're seeing folks. Thank you. We will be dropping in the chat an evaluation for a really quick and easy, just a few little questions that will ask you what worked well. And then also will ask you what other subjects you would like. And if you want to request, Hazel to come back and talk about the meditation and well-being pieces, or you want to request Jeff to come back and talk about Olympic hockey, we would be glad to encourage that. But thank you all for joining us today. We especially thank Hazel and Jeff for your willingness to, go above and beyond what you typically do. We hope that you all have a wonderful holiday that is safe and healthy and well, and that your Google searches go much better than your grandma's.